In today's world, many parents are deeply committed to providing a better life for their children. They dedicate themselves wholeheartedly to raising their children in a healthy environment, ensuring they grow up to be responsible adults. The first priority for many parents is to see their children settled, married, and eventually having families of their own. In later years, they hope to enjoy a peaceful life surrounded by their grandchildren, filled with family happiness. Throughout each stage of life, parents give selflessly without expecting anything in return. Yet many children take these sacrifices for granted, assuming that their parents are obligated to support them. If parents don't meet these expectations, they are often labeled as selfish. Some children even threaten not to care for their parents in old age, leaving many parents feeling disheartened. Aunt Jo, now 58, feels particularly strongly about this. She used to spoil her son, helping him with every detail of his life, buying him a car, a house, and even assisting with his wedding. After retiring, she spent 3 years caring for her son's child. Now that the child is in kindergarten, Aunt Jo wanted to travel with her husband. However, as soon as they made plans, her son and daughter-in-law scolded them for being wasteful. This deeply saddened Aunt Jo, and in her frustration, she decided to change her approach. She told her son and daughter-in-law that from now on, they would have to handle their own mortgage and childcare, and she would no longer provide financial support. She recently sent this message to them, standing firm in her decision. Some might think Aunt Jo's actions are harsh, believing that parents should always support their children. In the past, Aunt Jo herself felt that since she only had one child, it was worth going the extra mile for him. But her efforts were met with disappointment and heartache. At 58, Aunt Jo had been retired for over 3 years. When she first retired, she planned to attend a senior university to learn something new. However, soon after, her son called to inform her that his wife was over 4 months pregnant and needed bed rest. He asked Aunt Jo to come and take care of her. Hearing that her daughter-in-law was expecting a second child, Aunt Jo and her husband were thrilled, especially since their first grandchild was a precious grandson. They had always hoped for a granddaughter. But Aunt Jo wasn't fond of childcare, having found it distressing to care for her sick mother-in-law in the past. For their first grandchild, she had hired a nanny instead. Now, her son wanted her to care for his wife, but she suggested hiring a nanny or asking relatives for help. Her son refused, insisting that since she was retired, she should take on the responsibility herself, as other retired parents do. Aunt Jo couldn't argue with him and reluctantly gave up her plans to attend senior university, moving in with her son to care for her daughter-in-law during bed rest and helping with the older grandson. At first, the tasks seemed manageable: grocery shopping, cooking, accompanying her daughter-in-law to checkups, and picking up the older grandson. But soon her son came to her in tears, overwhelmed by the pressure of his wife's condition and their mortgage. Feeling sympathy for her son and knowing her retirement fund was sufficient, Aunt Jo decided to help with the mortgage, contributing over 3,200 yuan each month. Eventually, her daughter-in-law gave birth to a baby girl, bringing joy to Aunt Jo and her husband. They rewarded her with 20,000 yuan and eagerly helped with a new baby, hoping their daughter-in-law would return to work soon, easing the family's financial burden and allowing Aunt Jo to enjoy her retirement. However, after the birth of their second child, her daughter-in-law chose to stay home, spending her husband's money and refusing to return to work. She even insisted that Aunt Jo continue to help. Aunt Jo, uncomfortable with confronting her daughter-in-law, expressed her concerns to her son. But he asked her to be more understanding, explaining that childbirth had taken a toll on his wife, and she needed time to recover before returning to work. While Aunt Jo could understand the physical challenges of childbirth, she grew increasingly frustrated with her daughter-in-law's laziness. The daughter-in-law left the care of both children and the household to Aunt Jo, who was left to manage everything on her own. When a second granddaughter was just 4 months old, the daughter-in-law weaned her to maintain her figure, spending large sums on yoga and other activities to lose weight. This left Aunt Jo to care for both children, though the older grandson was at least self-sufficient enough to go to school and do his homework without causing trouble. However, the second granddaughter was very mischievous, keeping me busy all day without a moment's rest. But I knew caring for a newborn was always demanding, so I endured it. As my daughter-in-law regained her figure, she returned to being the beautiful woman she once was, Yet she showed no urgency to find work. Instead, she spent her days out with friends, either shopping or traveling. My son supported her, saying she deserved to relax after the difficult time she had with the second child. 2 years passed quickly, and soon the second granddaughter was old enough to start preschool. Still, my daughter-in-law did not return to work. By then, my son had been promoted, and his salary had increased significantly. With my help in paying the mortgage, the burden of raising 2 children wasn't heavy on him. So I decided it was time to let my daughter-in-law handle the children herself and return home. My decision to return home was also influenced by the fact that my husband had just retired. We had always planned to travel around the country together after retirement. Actually, we don't travel every day, it's about twice a month, with expenses controlled around 3,000 yuan per trip. My husband's retirement salary is higher than mine, at 5,000 yuan per month, and we also have considerable savings. So these trips were not extravagant for us and didn't affect our living standards. Initially, my son and daughter-in-law didn't know about our travel plans. After 2 months, when they noticed we had traveled 4 or 5 times, they became unhappy. My son called and said that since we had so much free time, we should help them with childcare. He also mentioned that his wife was becoming very haggard from taking care of 2 children. Hearing my son's emotional appeal, I was tempted to retort. After all, I had taken care of 2 children on my own without complaining. Now that the children were in school, why was he finding it so difficult? Moreover, did he expect us to come over and act as servants? I didn't express these grievances but gently told my son that during school vacations, we could have the children stay with us. I thought this arrangement would be acceptable to them, but my son continued to complain, making me feel embarrassed. So I discussed it with my husband, and we decided that instead of taking care of the children ourselves, we would pay for their daycare expenses each month. I also gave my son my retirement salary card, telling him that whatever money was in it could be used for their needs. They seemed quite satisfied with this arrangement and often expressed concern for our safety while traveling. However, during the Qingming festival, when my son's family came to visit and we briefly discussed our future travel plans, my daughter-in-law suddenly became displeased. She said that since we had 2 young grandchildren, we should limit our travels and save money to help raise the children. Hearing this, my husband spoke up, explaining that our travel budget was quite reasonable and that we spent less than 4,000 yuan on 2 trips each month, which was quite economical. But my daughter-in-law's complaints persisted. She accused us of spending too much on travel and not helping enough with the children. She said, "You spend 4,000 yuan a month on travel. That's too extravagant. Spending so much money and not helping us with the children is truly wasteful." At that point, my pent-up anger erupted. I told my daughter-in-law that while she might consider our spending extravagant, accusing us of being wasteful was going too far. My husband and I used our own retirement funds for travel, which did not affect the family's quality of life. How could that be considered wasteful? But she continued, "Have you ever seen parents who retire and spend over 4,000 yuan a month on travel? I dare say you're the only ones. Other parents use their retirement funds to ease their children's burdens, but you're just enjoying yourselves. If that isn't wasteful, then what is?" I was enraged and responded, "Isn't the support we've given you enough?" After that, my husband tried to calm me down, reminding me not to get angry, especially since it was a holiday. The argument ended with my son's family leaving, but what my daughter-in-law said really hurt both me and my husband. Even so, we tried to brush it off and not let it affect us, continuing our travels. However, my daughter-in-law kept complaining about our travels on social media, accusing us of being selfish and spending money only on ourselves without helping with the children. She even complained to my nieces and nephews, saying we were wasteful and spent money on travel without saving anything. At that time, relatives and friends began to think we were neglecting our son and grandchildren for the sake of travel, and they spoke poorly of us behind our backs. My husband and I were very embarrassed. I asked my daughter-in-law to mind her words, but she claimed she was just speaking the truth. My son, whom I had raised single-handedly, also sided with his wife against me. Seeing their united front, I couldn't hold back anymore and decided to stop indulging them. That night, I sent a message to my son, saying that from the next day onward, I would take care of my own finances and not give them another penny. No matter how my son and daughter-in-law reacted, I didn't answer their calls. The next day, I went to the bank and changed the password on my salary card. It's been over 20 days now, and I haven't contacted my son. My husband says I shouldn't be too extreme and wants me to compromise. But I believe that if I back down, they'll only continue to take advantage of us. Therefore, I won't compromise. This is Aunt Joe's story. Aunt Joe decided to cut off financial support to her son and daughter-in-law and insists on maintaining this stance until they apologize. Do you support Aunt Joe's actions? Thank you for watching, and see you next time.